Hello everybody, my name is Brian Hussar. Welcome to my channel, and this is where I talk about the Beatles, music, movies, and musical theater, but mostly the Beatles, especially in recent months. Thank you very much. Please stick around, subscribe, spread the word. Alright, so let's get to it. Here it is again. My number, you can see there. Nice low number. I've been doing a lot of this the last several days, taking the slipcover off and putting it back on. So, I'm going to do several reviews of this. I'm going to break it down. I'm not going to be limited by time, although I don't want to go too much over on any of these, but I'm going to do one talking about the new mix, another video talking about the Escher demos and the sessions discs, another video about the 5.1, and then the final will be an overall takeaway where I talk about the packaging and the overall of this. But this one, I'm specifically going to be talking about the new stereo mix of the White Album. Now, concerning the new mix of the White Album, I liked the original stereo mix. I didn't think much could be improved in a way of a stereo mix, because the Beatles around this time started to pay attention to stereo. They paid attention to mono as well. There's a number of tracks that were mixed first in mono and then in stereo, but some of them were mixed at the same time. I always liked that stereo mix. I heard the mono, and I always thought of the mono much more as a curio, as not as a definitive edition. There's some people I know that think the mono is the definitive edition of the album. And in America, we never heard the mono mix because mono was phased out in 1968 by the time the White Album came out. But the mono, when I did hear it, with the exception of two tracks, Revolution 1 and Revolution 9, in the mono, those two were not dedicated mono mixes. They were fold downs. Everything else had a dedicated mix, and they deliberately made them different. So which is definitive, stereo or mono? It's hard to say when it comes to the White Album. So I didn't know what Giles could do. I like what Giles did with Sgt. Pepper. I liked it a lot. I finally got a psychedelic headphone album, the way it was always talked about, but with the feel and the things that were happening in the mono mix. And I talked about that in my review last year of it. Now with the White Album, I found out that they really didn't use a template. They sort of had a free hand on this one. They referenced the stereo more than the mono, I did here, but they had a bit more freedom, and they wanted to not make it a perfect mix. I guess they completed this initially in January, and they had to start over again because the mix was too perfect. It was too perfect. He said it sounded like a Steely Dan or a Dire Straits album, which would have been interesting to hear sonically, but I think one of the charms of the White Album is that it is kind of sloppy. Your Blues, you hear John's guide vocal in the back while his actual vocal is happening in the forefront. Sgt. Pepper was the hi-fi album. The White Album actually wasn't. And I gotta tell you, overall, I like this new mix. I see this being my go-to mix. I do have one or two minor issues, and I'll talk about that. But overall, I'm very happy with the mix, and I'm pretty much shocked that I like it as much as I did, because at first I was like, I don't see a stereo mix being improved on. Giles did improve on it. He really did. I mean, back in the USSR, it's driving force in the drums and just guitars on that one. I like that one a lot. Dear Prudence, just something about it seems fuller now with the acoustic guitar in the beginning, and the drums are just driving in the last part, that semi-solo that Paul does on the drums. The one, I know a lot of people, when it came to While My Guitar Gently Weeps, they were talking about George's vocal ad-libs at the end were louder than Eric Clapton's guitar. I don't hear it, and normally I'm able to pick up on stuff like that. I don't hear it at all. His vocal being louder, the moaning that he does. I don't hear it. Maybe it's me. I have to play it a couple times, but I don't hear it. I still hear Eric Clapton's guitar. In fact, there's more Eric Clapton guitar in this mix than you heard in the other one, and in the original one. You hear a lot more like rhythmic playing that he does in between the licks that he plays in between the verses. So I'm hearing a lot more guitar from Eric Clapton in this mix than I ever did. So that's the one thing. And at first I didn't know, well, it wasn't there in the original mix. Was it wise to keep some of that other stuff, the chugging along that he does occasionally in between his licks, was it wise to keep that in there? I don't know. Is that delving on blasphemy? But I quickly got over that. I quickly got over my purist attitude of the Beatles and mixes. I was like, you know what? I like it. The more guitar, the better. That's why it's called While My Guitar Gently Weeps. You want to hear more guitar in that. Happiness is a Warm Gun. Love the artificial double tracking they did on the fuzz guitar lick. The fuzz guitar solo that John does in there. And I like the stereo placement in it. At first, it almost sounds like it's going back to the original mix with the Happiness is a Warm Gun in the right channel and the backing vocals in the left channel. But once John starts doing his speaking bit, When I Hold You in My Arms, he goes right to the center. That's another thing I like about this. There's a lot more centered drums in this one. And I'm going to get to another highlight for me on this album. All of the songs that would constitute side 2 of the album, very good sound in the mixes, very subtle in what he's done, but bringing a lot more detail and clarity. The guitars in a lot of places are more pronounced on this album than they ever have been before. You could probably say that this is a guitar-driven album nowadays, more than anything else. It's primarily guitar-driven and drums, but you're hearing a much more overall band sound in this that I like. You could hear that the band was there during the basic tracks. And when I talk further about this, we'll talk about the attitude and the way this peels away, this whole box set peels away a lot of the myths when we talk about the sessions discs. But here, the band is really good. And when Birthday begins on side 3, which the original stereo mix of that I always found to be kind of a lazy mix. The instrumental track is mono, and the vocals being artificially double-tracked are in stereo. Here you're getting a nice spread with the keyboards here, but the drums dead center, the power, the rockingness of that track. It's just in your face now. Same thing on Your Blues, and I noticed that he went with the mono version of the vocal, which has the reverb all the way through. That is in your face now. That is nasty, dark, wild. You know, I love it. One of the highlights for me is Sexy Sadie. I was talking about finding a way to spread the drums out, if there's a way of doing that. Because around this time you started getting stereo drum tracks. I mean, Glenn Johns was doing a lot of it with Zeppelin. And the Beatles, even in '69, when in America they moved to 16-track and you started getting a good stereo spread on drums, they would save 2 or 3 tracks for the drums. The Beatles, even on Abbey Road, with the exception of the end, were always focusing on a mono drum track. And the drums would still be here on Abbey Road and here. It was only the end that had a stereo spread on the drums. Giles on Sexy Sadie, you listen to it with headphones. I don't know what he did, but it's like I mean, it's happening. It's like a natural stereo drum spread. I love it. I was a bit underwhelmed by Helter Skelter. I don't know why. It seemed a bit quieter in the guitar attack. I was happy to hear more drums. I was happy with that guitar solo, which is much more aggressive. I was happy to hear a lot more amateurish saxophone playing by John. But I think if there's a consensus going right now on anything, is that the Helter Skelter track is a little bit underwhelming. Maybe once I understand the motives behind some of the choices that he made, then maybe I could be like, oh, okay. Like at the end, Ringo says, I got blisters on my finger, and there's this guitar attack that happens. Very quiet. I don't get it. Whereas it's in your face on the original stereo. In the mono, you never heard it anyway, so because it faded out and never came back in again. Long, 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 I'm finally happy we got a version where you could hear the vocals. Yes, that's a prayer from George. We're finally hearing the vocals with clarity, the words, everything about that is just beautiful. Even the weird ending with the wine bottle wobbling on the Leslie cabinet, and it gets strange like that. I love how weird it gets in the mixing there with the double tracking and the phasing effect happening in stereo. All the tracks on side 4 of the album, Revolution 1, Honey Pie, Savoy Truffle, I like the extra guitar attack that happens at the end there. It's nastier. Savoy Truffle I always thought of as a nasty song, even though it was inspired by George watching Clapton devour a box of Good News chocolates. It's a bit of social commentary in the way Piggy's is, and just hearing the guitar and the vocals up front as well as the horns, it's a nastier track. I love it. Revolution 9, whether you love it or you hate it, I love it. It's always a part of the album. I did a video on my love of it. I was a bit confused, and I had to check with a friend of mine, one of those people who are quote-unquote in the know. I said, did he remix Revolution number 9? Because it almost sounds like it's the same mix that they've always been using, even with the stereo panning. Now, unlike a lot of people, I've played Revolution 9 over and over and over again to try and pick out all the tape loops that are going on. So I know pretty much by heart where the pans happen and how it happens, and I'm like, it sounds the same, except the static pan, because I think John must have been manually panning too many times, you started hearing static from the pan knobs. Some of that is quieter. You could hear it with headphones. But my friend told me, yes, he remixed it. It's subtle, because he couldn't do much with it in the stereo. So it's very subtle. And with headphones on, you can hear more detail in the tape loops. You can hear more detail in the spoken word stuff. Now, when I talk about the 5.1 mix of this, that's a different story. And I can't wait to talk about the 5.1 surround mix of this one. Good Night, the orchestra, the backing vocals, you can hear with greater clarity and definition. There's the beautiful flute part that you hear on the last Dream Sweet Dream that you heard on Anthology 3 when it was just Ringo singing it, that I can hear now in this mix more than I ever did. So overall, I'm happy with this mix. The Helter Skelter bit, notwithstanding, overall that is individually of itself, it's a good mix. But overall, as a whole, this is a good mix, and I see it becoming my go-to. When I first put it on, it was like a new album. I mean, this is an album that was made 50 years ago, and it was like peeling away layers and layers and layers of dirt. Even on the remastered version of the original mix from 2009, which I felt there that opened it up. This was like a brand new album. It was like I'm hearing things, even additional instrumentation that I never heard before. I like what Giles is doing. I think certain message boards try and pick on Giles in a way. Like, who does Giles think he is? He's not his father, and all this stuff. I mean, Giles is commissioned to do this stuff. It sounds like he is sitting around brainstorming and thinking, ooh, let me remix this, and then run it by the other guys, and they're like, okay, yeah, let's put it out. Hey, let me do a mix on the White Album. No, it's basically the board, which consists of Paul, Ringo, Yoko, and Olivia Harrison, are there with, I think, Steve Berkowitz is his name, the head of Apple now, brainstorming ideas of what to do for the anniversary. And then Giles gets the commission. Giles, we want you to remix the White Album. So they brought the rawness back. They brought the heart. They elevated some of the orchestrations. Overall, this 2018 mix of the White Album is a dynamic mix. I like it overall, and that's my take on it. I will be talking about, the next time I join you, the Sessions discs and the Escher Demos discs. Let me know your thoughts on this. I know we're not all going to agree on it, but leave me a comment. And this is a long one, but I'm going to take my time on these. So I appreciate you sticking around. And I will see you again when I talk about the Escher Demo disc and the Sessions discs. Take care.